All right, we have Rocco Miller on the line. Rocco, I'm gonna have to get my headset. That's how this works here. But I have some questions for you with this whole bracketology. For those that don't know, Rocco Miller does Bracketeer, and I'll let you succinctly tell everybody here towards the end of this where they can follow you. But first and foremost, welcome to the program. This, I would assume, is starting to get into your season that you probably adore. Yes or no?
Absolutely. It's funny because that's how this all started several years ago for me personally, just being a college basketball junkie since I was little, all the way through adult life. And here we are. But, as I've been more involved on the media side of things in the last decade or so, it is a race to the finish, but we love it so much. I can't get enough of it. And I just wish there was more time in the day because I would love to spend time dissecting, over 100 different tournament hopefuls. Unfortunately, we have time constraints every single day. So we do as much as we possibly can.
Clearly, Joe Lunardi has become this guy that was kind of maybe on the forefront of that Mel Kiper-esque of the NFL draft, per se. He was the first one to maybe start doing this, got a big network behind him. Not that we're going to slander anybody or anything like that on this show, but I guess my question more or less is, between the folks that obviously take bracketology very, very seriously, what, in your opinion, are some of the differences between the opinions of Lunardi, the opinions of yourself, and even the opinions of others that do this?
I don't get asked that question nearly enough, so I'm really glad you asked it. So first of all, I'd just like to say, without Joe Lunardi, a bunch of us, maybe even 99% of us, would not really be doing this as a hobby. In 1996, however many years ago that was, almost 3 decades ago, 28 years ago, was the first time the word bracketology was ever used by Joe. Joe's a former blue ribbon guy. He started doing these postseason NCAA tournament previews. He'd try to put packets together in that 3-day window when the bracket came out to the first game so fans could have a guide on who are all these Cinderellas, who are these teams we're not familiar with. And eventually he turned that into, mid-season forecasting at some point and called it bracketology. Obviously inspired a whole generation of people. And that's about the time, I was, 12 to 18-year-old kid taking everything in. And so first of all, owe Joe a ton of respect. We are now friends for the last handful of years. So hopefully he'll see this. But, in general, what I realized when a website called the Bracket Matrix came out many years ago, about 12, 13 years ago, that internet bracketologists are actually more accurate than Joe in a lot of cases. And as it stands today, there's a couple hundred people that do it just as a hobby, all shapes and sizes. You have the guys at Fox and CBS and Joe. Then you have kind of your next cut of guys like me and whoever who have been doing it a long time. And then you have random new ones that show up every year. And we're all graded the same way. And so Joe's ranked like 98th out of the bracketologists. And I think it's nothing against him. I think it's just all the time constraints. It's hard for him to be as accurate as somebody that can pull an all-nighter and do all the breakdowns. Somebody like me, I was doing that for years. I still, to a degree, do that. And I put a lot of pride in the work. And I think the work is tricky because, Joe's job is partially to get people to watch games on ESPN. My job is just to tell you what the committee is going to do. I don't care what league you're from and what channel your games are on. So that's a huge distinction there. And I think in the end, it's kind of why I've been more accurate nearly every year for the last decade.
Okay, fair enough. The question I have now moving forward is two things. One, I do want to get in the Mountain West, which is a side tangent in and of itself that we'll talk about here maybe towards the back end. But first, we have a lot of local viewers, many of UC fans, Xavier fans, and then obviously some NKU fans. Let's focus on UC first here. UC obviously just find themselves this first year where they finally play in what we would call a big boy conference. They're playing against opponents that are ranked within the top, 40 net, usually within this league. How often, when you're looking at this from a bracketologist perspective, to where do you ever get to a position where you overvalue leagues, you think, and or you get yourself in a position where it's hard to justify what kind of wins are inside of this league versus another, or is it genuinely whatever the numbers say you believe in?
Well, by the book, one thing I do that I think is a little different is I've will record every interview that I can find on the internet or on CBS when the committee chairman gets interviewed and gets asked these exact same questions. Because again, my goal is to guess what they're going to do. Every single chairman or committee member I've interviewed over the years have all agreed that, you know, teams are not selected based on what league they play in. They're based on their own body of work, and then they're compared against each other. So Cincinnati is not necessarily going to be compared to like a TCU or a team in their league. Right now, they're getting compared to teams like Memphis, New Mexico, Utah, Gonzaga. And so that is really what it's about. It's about individual teams. So I try not to get lost at all in the conference conversation. Now, are we all humans? Do we all watch college basketball? Of course. So is that part of your psyche, perhaps, as a person who votes for these teams to be in or out in a committee setting? Absolutely. So there is a degree that you have to acknowledge, but I do think they do a pretty good job just based on what all the guidelines say, what all the policies say, on getting the right 36 at-large teams. You have your 32 automatic bids. And, you know, from there, they slot them. Every year I might disagree with one or two of their picks, but I think you can justify even the ones that I haven't been right about. So in general, I don't think that's a factor. I think what it is who did you play, where did you play, and how did you do? And even when you're in the same league, you know, Cincinnati, because they're new to the Big 12, much like UCF and BYU, they're not Houston level, and even Houston themselves, scheduled fairly weak in the non-conference. Right now, Cincinnati is at 296th ranked non-conference. It's a problem for them if they are right on the bubble, which they pretty much are right now, because those are reasons to throw a team out. But if you have great road wins, if you have, you know, all the other boxes checked, they'll be able to feel safe, especially in a league like that. More directly for the Big 12, just to address that real quick, there's so many big games, so many quad ones. They have more quad one games than any other league. So the data just kind of sorts itself out by the end of the year. You look at Oklahoma State last year. Oklahoma State loses their 15th game on the last week of the year. I told everybody that day there's no chance they're getting in because they just have too many losses. They're not going to be able to clear 500 by enough because they're going to take another loss once they get to the Big 12 tournament. So a lot of these teams were going to play themselves out just by sheer amount of losses. And when we talk about the Big East, I think we'll cover that too.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned New Mexico State, right? Or New Mexico, excuse me. I'm looking at them right now, and this league in and of itself, the Mountain West, which is kind of where I'm saying, okay, if you look at UC's resume and then you compare that up against some of these Mountain West teams are easily in, right? I mean, they're slotted, I believe, on your bracketology somewhere around the 8th seed. And when I say easily in, I mean they're not directly on the first four out, first four in.
Sure. Yep.
This league as a whole, since 2015, they went 1-3 in the tournament. San Diego State was their lone team that won a game. In 16, they went 0-1. 17, they went 0-1. In 18, Nevada did make the Sweet 16, so they went 2-2. In 19, they went 0-2. In 2020, to be fair, San Diego State was a top 5 team in the country. They didn't get a chance to play, obviously, because of the COVID. In 2021, this league went 0-2. In 2022, this league went 0-4. Last year, no one else won a game besides San Diego State again. So San Diego State, some, at least from the outside perspective, us over here on the East Coast, some think, okay, San Diego State carries this league. And maybe for here and there might be a team or two that wins a game, per se. Meanwhile, you look down the list, and you have a team like New Mexico, you have a team like Boise, and you have a team like Colorado State, who are on right around that 8 or 9 line. St. Mary's is a team this year, played non-conference games. They lose against Weber State. They lose against San Diego State. They lost to San Diego State, and they lost a game against Xavier. How is a team, I guess, for all intents and purposes, and I'm not here to suggest that you have to defend this wholeheartedly and be like, you plant the flag in the ground and be Mr. Mountain West. But how is it that they're easily in, yet you find teams that are on the bubble that have much, much better quality wins than they do?
Well, yeah, it's a tough question to answer it wholeheartedly, and I'll do my best to do that. But I think the first answer is opportunities. How many opportunities does everybody get? And what kind of opportunities do they get? So, of course, if you're in the Big 12, the SEC, the Big 10, even the ACC could get a couple cracks at teams like Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, who are all 4 pretty solid teams this season. You're not really getting that in the Mountain West. or even in St. Mary's Gonzaga case this year, usually they can at least go after each other at the top of the food chain. Now they're all kind of floating around bubble area. I would say out of all those teams, maybe only San Diego State can feel safe. They won at Gonzaga. They beat St. Mary's on a neutral court. They're mostly unbeatable at home, so that gets them some extra wins. They played a really tough road schedule. They're the first national runner-up I've ever seen play 4 true road games in the non-conference the following year. And they did that. They went to places like Grand Canyon and lost, and they went to UC San Diego, won by 1 point there. That's a team, people probably nationally don't know about, but they're second in the Big West, not even eligible for the NCAA. So in general, we have this quad system. We've had it since 2019. The net got introduced that year. And the Mountain West teams have been very savvy, as well as St. Mary's and a lot of the WCC teams, on figuring out how to play each other. Look how many times they play each other, those two leagues, to at least just make their non-conference schedule somewhat meaningful. They won't get a team like Houston or Duke or Kansas to say yes. So the next best thing they can do schedule-wise is just to play each other a bunch of times. Now, is that scheming the system to get more teams in? I don't know, but all they're doing is fighting for themselves the best way they know how. And at the end of the day, they end up with a handful of quad one opportunities when they have a strong non-conference year. And like you said, they do have 6 legitimately good teams. We don't know how good until, they're ultimately judged in the tournament, which is still like a 1-game sample size, probably not the most fair. But that's the reason why it is working the way it is. If the system changed or the policies changed, their schedule would change. So everybody's strategic. Everybody wants to get to the NCAA tournament. And this is just what the Mountain West has to do. And, now we're in a situation where you might have to take all 6 because they are looking better than, some of these teams like, even Cincinnati and Xavier just have too many losses right now. I don't think it's going to finish that way. There's going to be some other teams that emerge, like you said, with those big wins, like maybe a Pittsburgh or somebody like that. But as it stands today, they're kind of the safe choice for the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the safe choice because of, first of all, the appearance of the record, right, in and of itself looks relatively nice when there's 22 wins or there's 21 wins and there's only, 8 or 9 losses. The only pushback, though, that I guess I was getting at was you look at a team like Boise and, they have 2 big wins, I guess, if you want to call it that, VCU, and they beat St. Mary's, again, a St. Mary's team that, ultimately lost to Xavier. But my point is they lost to Clemson 85-68. They lost to Virginia Tech 82-75. They lost to Butler 70-56. These aren't even close games. They're not even competitive. They lose to Washington State. Now, Colorado State, if we wanted to try to give some love to the Mountain West, they have some good wins. I mean, they beat Wright State, they beat Creighton, they beat Colorado, they beat Washington. So it's just like it's one of those things, though, then when Boise goes and they find a way to beat Colorado State, it's like it's a 1-game sample size, but I guess my question is are they really getting credit for maybe what Colorado State was able to do out of conference? All right, that's here nor there. Last few questions as a whole, looking at bracketology. When do you feel confident that you think that you got it? Is it one of those things where some people complain about how the committee, if you want to call it that, and I put that in quotations, they make their decisions ultimately on the seed line before the championship games? You've heard Coach Cal discuss this before. When the SEC's playing on a Sunday, they win the SEC championship, and the next thing you know, their seed line isn't where they think it should be. When do you think, or do you think, they cut that seed line off before the actual all of the tournaments are over from a conference perspective?
So I've had the pleasure of serving on a mock selection committee the last handful of years, and the last 2 years we've done a much more organized approach to it. Just from we have a sponsor now. We have people tuning in and watching us. So this year we'll be doing that March 1st through 3rd, a few weekends away out of Omaha, and then the whole committee, our mock committee, we're all going to the Creighton Marquette game that night on March 2nd. But I bring that up because every single part of being in the mock committee is mimicked to do the exact steps of the actual committee. So there's no guessing game on how it works or what order it goes in. We have our initial on the first night of meetings, which is in real committee talk, that Wednesday night of championship week, they'll have their top 32 established and all voted on. And then everybody else goes into the at-large voting pile, which is kind of what you would consider the bubble, the 9 seeds and below. And it's got a cluster of teams that won't get in. So that's much more deep, detailed voting from there. And the seeding actually comes at the end. So once results are coming in on Thursday, there might be a big upset. There might be somebody that was kind of torn. You could have some switches on the seed lines still on Thursday. And I think by Friday, they really start slotting the teams. And then by Friday night, they're building what's called contingency brackets in case on Saturday and Sunday there are bid steals. So I think by Friday night, and this has been scooted forward, year after year for the last handful of years, and we're now at a point where it's pretty much almost done from an at-large perspective on Friday night. So from that point forward, it does dilute those championship games a lot. If both teams are getting in, you might still see a great basketball game, but unfortunately, it's not going to usually impact their seed or their placement in the bracket.
All right, fair enough. So there's rightful gripe, if you want to call it that. But the reality is you're trying to put out a bracket within hours, if not less than an hour, after some of these games complete. And it's fair from a committee perspective to say, listen, what do you want us to do? But at the same time, from a coach's perspective, you'd like to think that all the games count, especially if they matter from a seed line perspective. Final question here, moving forward. Hopefully, we can have you back here in a couple weeks as the drama starts to intensify here. But from your perspective, is there any team that you have either just outside the bubble or on the bubble that you think, in your mind, is a little better than everybody thinks that they are, and they will find themselves to have a pretty good tournament run if they were to get in?
Good question. I think there's a couple, and I think the metrics actually kind of show this. If you look at Ken Pom and Torvik and those. So Wake Forest has an incredible offense. The problem for them is they can't win road games. So they don't have a road resume, really. Their best road win is at Boston College. They're 1-5 in their toughest road games. But we've seen how Wake looks when they hammer teams, and they have a different gear. They just got to figure out, of course, some defensive issues they're always trying to clean up. Seems like with Forbes there, was Forbes a good friend of mine. I followed them closely at East Tennessee State. So I do think they're pretty dangerous with all their weaponry on offense. And then I also would say this New Mexico team, I know it's a Mountain West team. Donovan Dent got hurt the other night. So, hopefully his status is okay going forward for their sake. But I think when you have Donovan Dent, Jalen House, Jamal Mashburn Jr., JT Toppins, one of the best freshmen in the country, they actually are very deep and loaded teams. That's why you're seeing them destroy people and being in the top 20-ish Ken Pom right now. But again, they don't have a road resume either. So these teams, I don't know if they'll get in, but if they do, that they're not a team you really want to face because they have NBA level players, and obviously that's that matchup nightmare for a lot of teams.
All right. Thank you, Rocco. We appreciate your time. I'll let you get back to it. Where are you at right now? Looks like you might be in a hotel. Are you on the road, or what's the
Yeah, got a big week in Florida. So I just got to Boca Raton last night. I got the Florida Atlantic game against Temple tonight, and then I'll be off to Florida State Saturday for Florida State Duke, and then Sunday Florida Atlantic once again at South Florida, which should be a first place game with South Florida being in first.
There you go. All right. Well, enjoy the season. I know this is probably the time, as I said, that you cherish the most, and you should. Nothing better than getting down towards Selection Sunday, watching all of the small conferences get their automatic bids through championship week and getting to the Selection Sunday and being on the edge of your seat. And then obviously the tournament itself has produced some crazy results the last few years. So we'll hopefully have you back here, like I said, as things get closer to the end, and appreciate you coming on and joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime, fellas. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.